Inner change does not always announce itself through emotion. Sometimes it appears as pressure. Not tension, not anxiety, not distress. Pressure in the sense of something held, contained, and no longer allowed to move outward. Life may continue without disruption. Daily responsibilities remain manageable. Nothing externally forces a pause. Yet internally, the experience of momentum has altered. Forward pull weakens. Projection loses intensity. The future no longer exerts the same psychological gravity. This shift often arrives without explanation. The mind searches for causes but finds none that fit. Circumstances look acceptable. Health is intact. Structure is present. And still, the inner state has changed. What was once energized now feels neutral. What once demanded pursuit now feels oddly distant. The effort to want things begins to exceed the reward of wanting them. This is frequently misread. The experience is often labeled as boredom, burnout, or emotional withdrawal. None of these descriptions are accurate. Burnout implies depletion. Here, energy is not depleted. It is withheld. Withdrawal implies avoidance. Here, nothing is being avoided. Something is being gathered. The difference is subtle but decisive. The pressure felt during this phase is not pushing outward. It does not drive action. It holds action in suspension. This suspension can feel disorienting, especially for individuals accustomed to psychological propulsion. People who relied on desire, ambition, or self-direction often notice this change first. The internal engine still exists, but it idles. Attempts to accelerate produce no response. The mind may attempt to compensate. It generates reasons. It recalls former motivations. It rehearses future scenarios. These efforts fail to restore momentum, not because the individual has lost capacity, but because the psyche has altered orientation. The sensation that follows is dense. Time feels thicker. Waiting becomes unavoidable. Moments stretch without emotional punctuation. There is no crisis embedded in this experience. That absence is what makes it confusing. No alarm signals appear. No emotional collapse justifies concern. Yet something important is clearly happening. The individual may notice a reduction in emotional contrast. High points flatten. Low points soften. Life feels quieter, but not empty. Quiet in a way that feels charged rather than peaceful. This distinction matters. Peace implies resolution. This state does not feel resolved. It feels contained. Contained experience often produces pressure. Pressure is the psyche's way of holding material that has not yet been released or reorganized. At this stage, the psyche has not produced insight. It has not clarified meaning. It has not revealed direction. It has only altered flow. The outward flow of energy has slowed. The inward consolidation has begun. Because this process unfolds beneath conscious awareness, language struggles to keep pace. Most people describe the phase indirectly. I don't know what I want anymore. I feel stuck, but nothing is wrong. Things don't move me the way they used to. These statements are not complaints. They are observations. They describe a state where desire no longer organizes experience. Desire once acted as a compass. It pulled attention forward. It justified effort. Without it, orientation dissolves. But dissolution here is temporary. The psyche has not abandoned direction. It has suspended it. Suspension creates pressure. This pressure can be felt physically. Some describe it as heaviness in the chest. Others as a tightness behind the eyes. Others as a full, unmoving sensation in the body. These sensations are not symptoms to be resolved. They are signals. Signals that energy is no longer being expended outward. The psyche is conserving. Conservation often precedes reorganization. This is why distraction loses effectiveness during this phase. Entertainment fails to relieve the sensation. Busyness only delays awareness. The pressure returns when activity stops. Because the pressure is not caused by inactivity. It is caused by internal containment. The psyche is holding something in place. Holding without explanation. This creates a sense of being on the edge of something undefined. Not anticipation. Not excitement. Suspension. The individual may sense that something is nearing completion, even though nothing appears to be concluding externally. Old ambitions no longer compel action. Former identities no longer feel convincing, but no new structure has replaced them. This gap is uncomfortable. The mind prefers continuity. Continuity creates predictability. Predictability feels safe. Here, predictability dissolves quietly, not through disruption, but through irrelevance. What once mattered still exists, but no longer commands emotional authority. Authority drains before it collapses. The draining phase is subtle. It feels like indifference rather than rejection. This indifference can be unsettling. Indifference is often mistaken for apathy, but apathy implies disengagement. Here, engagement remains. What fades is attachment. Attachment requires projection. Projection requires belief in a future state. When belief weakens, projection withdraws. Pressure fills the space projection once occupied. This is why the state feels heavy. Weight belongs to containment. Lightness belongs to dispersion. Earlier, energy dispersed into plans, goals, and imagined futures. Now it gathers inward. Gathering creates density. Density creates pressure. This process is not dramatic. It does not demand attention. It unfolds quietly. This quietness is why it is often missed or misdiagnosed. Those who experience it may feel isolated. Others appear unaffected. Others continue striving. Others remain animated by desire. This contrast can intensify confusion, but the experience is not universal. It appears at specific psychological thresholds. Thresholds where previous orientations have completed their function. The psyche does not discard orientations arbitrarily. It exhausts them. Only when exhaustion is complete does withdrawal occur. The individual does not choose this withdrawal. It happens, often without warning. And when it happens, the old ways of generating momentum no longer respond. The pressure that follows is not asking for action. It is asking for tolerance. Tolerance of not knowing. Tolerance of not moving. Tolerance of not defining. This tolerance is difficult because it offers no reward. There is no immediate insight, no emotional payoff, no reassurance, only containment. Yet containment serves a purpose. The psyche is stabilizing something internally. Stabilization requires stillness. Stillness creates pressure when energy is present. And energy is present here, very much so. This is why the state does not feel empty. It feels full, full without expression. Expression will come later, but not yet. At this stage, the psyche is preparing the ground for a breakthrough that has not revealed its form. The individual may sense this intuitively. A sense of something is coming may appear, but without imagery or expectation. This sense does not energize. It steadies. It keeps attention close. This is a signal, not excitement, not motivation. Pressure, a quiet, contained signal that appears right before a psychological breakthrough, not the breakthrough itself, the moment before. And recognizing this signal changes how it is lived, not by resolving it, but by allowing it to exist without misinterpretation. That allowance does not end the phase, but it prevents unnecessary struggle. The pressure remains, but it is no longer mistaken for failure. It becomes what it is, a sign that something internally has stopped expanding because it is reorganizing. That realization settles, without resolving anything, without pushing forward, simply by naming the state accurately. Inner pressure does not emerge arbitrarily. It appears when the psyche reaches a point where continuation along the same internal trajectory is no longer possible, yet redirection has not been completed. This is the phase where outward movement has already lost legitimacy, but inward reorganization is still underway. The pressure exists precisely in that interval. Carl Jung described this condition indirectly when he wrote about moments in psychological development where conscious orientation no longer corresponds to unconscious reality. In such moments, the psyche does not immediately offer a new direction. Instead, it withdraws energy from the old one. What is felt as pressure is the lived experience of that withdrawal. Earlier in life, psychological energy flowed outward almost automatically. It moved into ambition, into desire, into imagined futures, into roles and identities that promise coherence. This outward flow created momentum. Momentum gave structure to time. You knew what was next because something inside you pulled you forward. At a certain point, however, that pull weakens, not gradually in every case. Sometimes it diminishes abruptly. The psyche recognizes that the existing orientation has reached its limit. Continuing to invest energy into it would only produce repetition, not development. When this happens, the unconscious intervenes, not by offering a new vision, but by suspending the old one. Jung emphasized that the unconscious often acts through inhibition rather than instruction. It does not tell the ego what to do next. It removes support from what is no longer viable. The ego experiences this as loss of motivation, but the psyche experiences it as protection. Protection from building the future on an outdated structure. The pressure that follows is a sensation of energy being held back. Energy has not disappeared. It has been contained. Containment is psychologically dense. When energy disperses, it feels light. When energy gathers, it feels heavy. This heaviness is not emotional weight. It is structural density. The psyche is consolidating experience. It is pulling fragments inward. Earlier, identity may have been spread across many external reference points, achievements, expectations, roles, future projections. Now, those extensions are retracting. Retraction produces pressure. The ego, accustomed to expansion, resists this process. It searches for ways to restore outward flow. It attempts to reignite desire. It tries to reinterpret the sensation as a problem to be solved. But the psyche does not respond, because the psyche is not asking for action. It is performing an internal operation. This is where misunderstanding often arises. The ego interprets pressure as blockage, but pressure is not blockage. It is containment. Blockage implies obstruction. Containment implies intention. The psyche is intentionally holding energy in place. This holding allows reorganization to occur without fragmentation. Jung warned that when psychic change happens too quickly, the ego destabilizes. Containment prevents this. The pressure phase slows time. It forces the individual to remain present. Without projection, the mind has nowhere to escape. This is uncomfortable, but it is functional. The psyche requires sustained contact with the present to integrate unconscious material. Integration cannot happen while attention is constantly projected into the future. That is why projection must withdraw. The withdrawal projection creates a vacuum. Pressure fills that vacuum. Pressure is what remains when projection collapses, but energy persists. This explains why the phase does not feel empty. It feels full, but directionless. Directionlessness is the cost of reorientation. The psyche cannot point forward until it has reorganized its center. Centering happens inward. The ego is not accustomed to inward centering. The ego organizes life through goals and narratives. When those narratives dissolve, the ego feels disoriented. But the psyche does not operate through narrative. It operates through structure. Structure must be rebuilt before narrative can return. Pressure holds the psyche in that rebuilding phase. Jung often spoke about the necessity of holding the tension of opposites. This phase is exactly that. One part of the psyche wants movement. Another part insists on stillness. The tension between them creates pressure. This tension cannot be resolved by choosing one side. Movement too early recreates the old pattern. Stillness too rigidly enforced creates stagnation. The psyche resolves the tension internally by reorganizing conditions that produced it. This takes time. Time experience without projection feels heavier. Moments stretch. Waiting becomes unavoidable. The ego resists waiting because waiting implies loss of control. But control belongs to conscious orientation. During transformation, control temporarily shifts to unconscious processes. The ego must tolerate not knowing. Pressure ensures that tolerance. If the pressure were absent, the ego would prematurely act. It would force resolution. It would construct a new identity on top of an unstable foundation. The psyche prevents this by making action feel ineffective. Effort produces no response. Motivation fails to ignite. This is not punishment. It is regulation. The psyche regulates the pace of development. Another source of pressure comes from identity contraction. Earlier, Identity may have been reinforced by external confirmation, feedback, recognition, progress. When these lose emotional impact, identity contracts. Contraction feels like pressure. The ego experiences contraction as loss. The psyche experiences it as simplification. Simplification is necessary before expansion can occur again. Jung believed that individuation requires periodic contraction of identity. Without contraction, the ego becomes inflated. Inflation creates imbalance. The pressure phase corrects inflation. It pulls identity inward. This inward movement can feel like shrinking. But what is shrinking is not the self. What is shrinking is identification with a specific form. The self remains intact. It is simply reorganizing how it expresses itself. Pressure is a sign that expression has paused. Expression pauses so that structure can adjust. This is why the pressure often coincides with a loss of interest in self-definition. You may find it difficult to describe yourself. Labels feel inadequate. Descriptions feel hollow. This is not confusion. It is predefinition. The psyche has not yet decided what form will replace the old one, so it withholds language. Language comes after structure. Pressure holds the psyche in that pre-verbal state. The ego finds this frustrating. It wants clarity. It wants certainty. But certainty at this stage would be false. Any clarity offered too early would be provisional and misleading. Jung emphasized that premature clarity is one of the greatest obstacles to genuine transformation. The psyche avoids this by maintaining pressure. Pressure discourages premature conclusions. It keeps the individual suspended. Suspension allows unconscious material to surface without interference. This material often does not appear as images or insights. It appears as shifts in feeling tone. What once mattered loses charge. What once threatened loses urgency. Emotional extremes flatten. This flattening is not emotional numbing. It is emotional rebalancing. Intensity belonged to the old orientation. Neutrality prepares the ground for a new one. Pressure stabilizes neutrality. Another element contributing to pressure is the withdrawal of future orientation. The ego lives in anticipation. When anticipation collapses, the ego feels disoriented. But the psyche operates independently of anticipation. It functions in the present. Pressure anchors attention in the present. Without anticipation, the present becomes heavier. You are more aware of your internal state, less distracted by possibility. This awareness is not introspective by choice. It is imposed by circumstance. The psyche removes escape routes. Not cruelly, deliberately. It forces contact with what is. Contact precedes integration. Integration precedes movement. This is the sequence. Pressure enforces the sequence. The pressure phase also protects against repetition. Without it, the ego would recycle familiar solutions. It would rebuild the same identity with new details. The psyche wants something genuinely different. Difference requires disruption of habitual patterns. Pressure disrupts habit. It makes old responses feel ineffective. This ineffectiveness is essential. It creates space for something else to emerge. But emergence cannot be rushed. The psyche does not reveal new orientation until the old one has fully dissolved. Pressure ensures full dissolution. It prevents partial abandonment. Partial abandonment leads to regression. Jung observed that incomplete transitions often result in neurotic repetition. The psyche avoids this by insisting on completion. Completion feels like pressure before it feels like release. This is why the phase can feel prolonged. The psyche is thorough. It does not negotiate. The ego may protest. But protest does not alter the process. Understanding this reframes the experience. Pressure is not an obstacle to overcome. It is the mechanism of transformation, not the result. The mechanism. It indicates that something fundamental is reorganizing beneath awareness. That reorganization cannot be observed directly. It can only be felt as pressure, as density, as suspension. This is the internal logic of the phase. Not pathology, not failure, not delay, preparation. And preparation feels like nothing is happening until it isn't. The release does not arrive with force. It does not feel like relief in the way most people expect. It does not announce itself as clarity or excitement. It does not resolve itself into a dramatic realization. In fact, it is easy to miss. What changes first is not emotion, but orientation. The inner pressure that once held everything in suspension begins to dissolve quietly, not by pushing outward, not by transforming into motivation, but by losing its density. The weight lifts without ceremony. One day, effort stops feeling blocked, not suddenly easier, not energized, simply unopposed. The internal resistance that once prevented movement is no longer present, and yet there is no urgency to act. This is the crucial difference. When pressure dissolves because it was avoided or bypassed, urgency rushes in to fill the gap. Action becomes compulsive. Direction becomes reactive. Here, no such urgency appears. The psyche does not rush forward. It settles. Carl Jung described this phase as a restoration of balance between conscious orientation and unconscious structure. When the unconscious has completed its reorganization, it no longer needs to inhibit the ego. The inhibition lifts, but it does not reverse into pressure. It neutralizes. Neutralization feels ordinary. This ordinariness can be confusing. Many people expect transformation to feel exceptional. Instead, life resumes with a different internal gravity. You may notice that decisions no longer require internal debate, not because everything is clear, but because fewer things feel conflicted. Earlier, conflict was constant. Action fought against containment. Desire fought against withdrawal. The ego fought against timing. Now, those internal battles are absent, not resolved through reasoning, resolved through completion. The psyche has finished the work it needed to do. What that work was may never be fully articulated. It does not need to be. Its completion is marked by a change in how movement feels. Movement returns without charge. You begin doing things again, but not with the old intensity, not with the old self-monitoring, not with the sense that everything must mean something. Action becomes functional rather than symbolic. Earlier, action defined identity. Now, identity no longer depends on action. This is one of the clearest signs that integration has occurred. The self no longer needs to be reinforced. Jung believed that when the ego is no longer struggling to maintain coherence, it becomes a tool rather than a center. The center shifts inward, from ego to self. This shift is subtle. It does not produce a new personality. It produces stability. Stability is not exciting, but it is enduring. You may notice that you are less reactive, not detached, less reactive. Things happen, and they do not immediately demand interpretation. You respond, but you do not narrate. This absence of narration is significant. Earlier, life required constant internal commentary. What does this mean? What does this say about me? What should happen next? Now, those questions arise less frequently, not because you have answers, because you no longer need them. Orientation has returned, but it is not future-based. It is present-based. You know where you stand. Even if you do not know where you are going, this knowing is enough. Earlier, not knowing the future felt threatening. Now it feels neutral. The psyche no longer demands projection to feel safe. This is one of the quiet outcomes of integration. The future stops exerting pressure. Possibility remains, but it does not pull. You are no longer living ahead of yourself. You are living where you are. This changes how effort is experienced. Effort no longer feels like self-coercion. It feels proportional. You do what is required. You stop when it is done. There is less emotional residue around action. This is not efficiency in the productivity sense. It is efficiency in the psychological sense. Energy is no longer wasted on internal conflict because conflict has resolved itself. Resolution here does not mean agreement. It means alignment. The psyche and ego are no longer working at cross purposes. Jung emphasized that psychological health is not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of inner division. Division was present during the pressure phase. That division has now closed. This closure changes how responsibility feels. Earlier, responsibility felt heavy. It carried identity weight. It felt like proof of worth or failure. Now, responsibility feels factual. Something needs attention. You attend to it. No internal drama. No symbolic meaning. just response. This simplicity can feel unfamiliar. You may wonder if something is missing. Intensity, perhaps, but intensity was a byproduct of instability. When things are unsettled, emotion spikes. When things settle, emotion levels. This leveling is not loss. It is grounding. Grounding allows continuity. You are no longer starting over internally. You are continuing. This continuity is one of the most overlooked signs of a breakthrough. Not a burst of energy, not a new vision, but the absence of interruption. Life begins to flow again. Not fast, not slow. Steady. Steadiness supports depth. Depth allows meaning to accumulate naturally. Meaning is no longer hunted. It accrues. Jung believed that meaning emerges when life is lived in alignment with the self, not when it is pursued as an objective. This phase reflects that. You stop searching for meaning. You notice it retroactively, after something has been lived, after a decision has been made, after a period has passed. Meaning appears quietly, often in hindsight. This retroactive meaning is more stable than anticipatory meaning. Anticipatory meaning collapses when expectations fail. Retroactive meaning integrates experience. This integration is one of the reasons the pressure phase was necessary. Without integration, experience fragments. Fragmentation leads to repetition. Integration prevents it. Now that integration has occurred, repetition loses its grip. You may notice that old patterns do not reassert themselves. Not because you are resisting them, because they no longer fit. Fit is a new guide, not desire, not fear. Fit. Fit is felt, not conceptualized. You sense when something aligns and when it does not. This sensing is immediate. It does not require justification. Earlier, you explain your reactions. Now you trust them. This trust is not blind. It is earned. You endured a phase where nothing made sense. You remain present. You did not collapse into distraction. The psyche remembers this. Trust forms through experience, not belief. Because of this trust, future transitions will feel different. You will recognize the pressure when it appears again, not as failure, as signal. And because you recognize it, you will not misinterpret it. You will not rush to escape. You will not force meaning too early. This changes the arc of development permanently, not by preventing future pressure phases, but by changing your relationship to them. You are less afraid of internal quiet, less afraid of not knowing, less afraid of losing momentum. You have learned that momentum can return without being chased. This learning is embodied. It does not require recollection. It shows up as calm. Calm is often mistaken for complacency, but calm here is not passivity. It is readiness without urgency. You are available to life again, not demanding, not resisting, available. This availability is what allows movement to resume naturally. Movement now responds to circumstance rather than compulsion. You act when action is appropriate. You pause when it is not. Timing becomes intuitive, not mystical, experiential. You sense when to engage and when to wait. This sensing was impossible during the pressure phase. Now it has returned. Quietly, without instruction, without effort. This is a completion, not a breakthrough as spectacle. A breakthrough as stabilization. The psyche has reorganized. The pressure has dissolved. Orientation has returned, but the old mode of living has not. And that is the difference. You do not go back. You continue from a new center. That center is less performative, less reactive, less dependent on outcome. It is not dramatic. It is reliable. Reliability is what allows life to be lived without constant self-management. This is the outcome the psyche was preparing for. Not clarity, not motivation. Coherence. Coherence feels simple, but it is a product of complex inner work. Work that occurred without your conscious participation. Work that expressed itself only as pressure. Now that the work is complete, the pressure is no longer needed. So it leaves, without farewell, without announcement. You notice it only by its absence. And in that absence, life feels workable again. Not exciting, workable, which is enough. The pressure you experienced was never meant to be solved. It was meant to complete. It marked a phase where the psyche withdrew support from an old orientation, so a new one could form without distortion. Nothing went wrong. Nothing stalled. Something reorganized. If this reflection resonates, it is likely because you recognize the signal it describes, not as a concept, as something you lived. If you want to continue exploring these internal transitions, you are welcome to subscribe to the Inner Shadow Signal. And don't hesitate to leave a comment. You don't need to explain anything. Sometimes, just sharing thoughts is enough. See you in the next video, or in the comment section.